This is American History for Friday, October 23. A reminder that next Wednesday we have a quiz. Please make sure that you're ready for it. We need to go back all the way to the American Revolution. Now, the Treaty of Paris of 1782 is going to give the western side of the Mississippi River to the Spanish. Now, this will continue for the next couple of years. Now, the Spanish wanted to make money. The Spanish wanted to sell the land, and they preferred to sell the land to Americans who would continue to be traveling westward. Well, if you're going to sell land, the first thing you need a real estate agent. This is the real estate agent that is going to cover Missouri. This is Kentuckian Daniel Boone. Now, Boone had encountered some financial problems in Kentucky. And to solve these financial problems, Boone is going to come to Missouri and he's going to sell the land. Now, the way it usually works, for ever so many acres of land Boone sells, the Spanish government will give him some land. This is Boone's home in what is now St. Charles County. He named his home Defiance. It looks out over the Missouri River. This is on Highway 94, just as you are entering St. Charles, Missouri. Now again, he received land. Now, who are the people that Boone selected? Well, Boone is going to go through the South primarily. He's going to go through South and North Carolina. He's going to go to Kentucky. He's going to go to Tennessee. He invites the people to come to Missouri and make their home there. Land was cheap. Well, of course, these people have slaves, and they're going to bring them with them. Well, this became a problem in 1819. In 1819, there are enough people living in the territory of Missouri that Missouri can now become a state. Now, the way it works is Missouri is going to draw up a constitution. Missouri will then submit it to the Congress, and the Congress will either vote thumbs up or thumbs down. Well, as it turned out, in 1819, Congress voted down Missouri becoming a union. And the reason for this is because Missouri would be a slave state. Now, at the time, in 1819, there were an identical number of slave and free states. And the free states felt that this would change the balance of power in the U.S. Senate. In 1821, Congressman Henry Clay from Kentucky will propose the Missouri Compromise. Now, the compromise will be accepted, and Missouri will become a state. The compromise is pretty simple. Missouri will come in as a slave state. Maine will come in as a free state. Now, if you can look here, you can see Missouri's southern border. Missouri's southern border will be the dividing line. Any future territory, Arkansas, that comes in after Missouri, if it's below the border, then it will become a slave state. Any state that comes in after Missouri that is above that line, i.e. Michigan, will become a free state. Now, this compromise is going to bring Missouri into the Union. From 1800 to 1824, the United States had lived under the Virginia dynasty. The role of the American citizen has changed in those 20 some odd years. The nation is beginning to change from an agrarian nation to an industrial nation. More and more factories are being found in New England. They need a workforce. Now, originally, the owners of the factories went to the farmers of New England and offered them a chance to work in the factories for more money than they could make on the farm. But what a lot of these people did was they went to work in the factories, they made some money, and then they left the area to go farther west to buy cheap land. Industry needs workers. To that end, they began to advertise in Europe, and immigrants began to flood in. Now, two groups are going to come in great numbers. First will be the Germans. The Germans came in prior to the American Revolution, and they hit their high point in the 1830s. After the 1830s, there is a potato famine in Ireland, and the Irish began to flood into this area. So if you're ever asked on a quiz, where did most of the immigrants come from, you'll have to look at the date. Again, before the 1830s, it was Germany. After the 1830s, it was Ireland. American society itself is beginning to change. Americans are becoming more cultural. Now, prior to this time, Americans would accept anything that came out of Europe as culture. Now, Americans are beginning to create their own culture. They're beginning to create their own art. They're beginning to create their own literature. They're beginning to create their own poetry. One of the things that Americans were upset about was that the language had no accepted spelling. Noah Webster, who was a publisher in New England, is going to try to correct this when he sets down what he calls a dictionary. And in his dictionary, he will write down words and their meanings. This will be both for the English and the Americans. One of the first authors to make a big impact in this new America was James Fenimore Cooper. Now, James Fenimore Cooper is going to write about life during the French and Indian War. His most popular book became The Last of the Mohicans. Now, please understand, James Fenimore Cooper was not alive during the French and Indian War. He had heard tales about people who had been alive and decided to take these tales and create a novel. He's going to romanticize the people who lived in upstate New York. He had a unique way of telling the story. American artists are going to begin to paint pictures. Now, prior to this time period, American artists always painted pictures the same way that Europeans painted. Most American artists were trained in Europe. John J. Audubon was the exception. John J. Audubon is only going to paint those subjects that are unique to America. And the subject that Audubon chose to paint were birds. Some of the most highly detailed pictures of birds are found in Audubon's book. Here is a brief biography about Audubon. As the United States entered the middle of the 19th century, that would be from 1820 to 1860, the United States is going to be pulled apart in what we call sectionalism. First, there would be the North, the South, and the West. And then by the time we got past the Mexican-American War, that would be the mid-1840s, we would have North and South. So in our next lesson, we are going to look at sectionalism for the North, the South, and the West. And this is going to have Andrew Jackson as the spokesperson. And then in lessons 13 and 14, we're going to look at sectionalism North and South. And then finally in lesson 15, and we'll get to that around Thanksgiving, we'll have the American Civil War. This is the end of lesson 10.